Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to look at recurrent weather. If something is recurrent, it happens often, or it happens repeatedly, or it happens from time to time. And so these weather events are going to be dramatic. Doesn't happen all the time, but when they do, everybody remembers them. So we're going to talk about flooding and droughts and heat waves and cold snaps and the like. So let's look at some details. A serious amount of water vapor in the air, and it's turbulent, unstable air. So you can get a ridiculous amount of rain even from a single thunderstorm. If too much rain falls, then what happens is that the ground doesn't soak up the rain, but basically the rain just washes off. So you have runoff, and that runoff immediately goes into rills and gullies and streams, and then the rivers are choked, and then what's happening, you end up with walls of water. So you can either have, if it rains and rains and rains and there's no ground soaking, there's no water soaking into the ground, everything is running off, then that can undermine your foundation on your house can wash away. It can, of course, swamp cars and anything on the road as you're driving. You would never drive into standing water or moving water. It will kill you. And I've known people who have died as a result of trying to drive through water. It's not smart. So a flood is really just a lot of water too fast. It might not be more water than that area is used to. It's just too fast for the ground to soak in, and you end up with runoff that can't be drained by the river systems. So hurricanes are really famous for flooding, because a hurricane usually is not just a huge thunderstorm, but it's also moving very slowly. So if you have a slow-moving, even a normal storm, not even a huge storm, but if it's really, really slow-moving, then all the water that normally would be dumped on 3 states is dumped on your town. You're going to flood. And in the mountains especially, if you have lots of clear-cut areas where whole groups of trees, whole stands of trees have been cut at once, then that will even promote flooding, because then it can't be absorbed by the roots of the trees, and you end up with lots and lots of erosion, lots of runoff, and then lots of water rushing down into the streams all at once, plus whatever debris and weathering and erosion of rocks and whatever that would cause also. Of course, the people at most risk are the low-lying areas, and if you have really steep areas. So if you have way more rain than normal and you're in a particularly steep valley, you can have flooding even though you might be on higher ground than you think would normally flood. Now, too much water, of course, is a flood. Too little water is a drought. And a drought usually is brought on. Well, obviously a drought is where you have long periods of very little precipitation. Even if you were to have, like in this picture, nice fluffy clouds in the sky, there's no rain there. And normally that has to do with the pressure of the air. When you have a high pressure system, usually you have nice blue skies and you don't have stratus clouds and you don't have precipitation. When you have a low pressure system, that's when you end up with a cloudy day that could end up raining on you. Well, if for whatever reason you get a high pressure region stuck in an area for way longer than normal, it could cause a drought. So if the upper level winds, okay, remember you have jet stream winds, if the upper level winds are blowing in such a way that whole regions of a country or a region is bypassed and end up with really high pressure for a long period of time, you could have even months with no water. If you were to have that, that is definitely called a drought. Your crops normally will fail during that time. Your groundwater is depleted. Even the wells could run dry. It could be a catastrophic event. and droughts have led to migration, mass starvation, and disease. It's ugly, and a lot of that has to do with a high pressure area that's essentially stuck over an area. Remember the flooding caused by a storm that's stalled over an area? Okay, the famous floods that we had about 10 years ago were caused by a very normal thunderstorm. Not a big deal, except that it just didn't move. And it didn't move and it didn't move, and for 2 days it just rained and rained and rained, and you ended up with flooding everywhere. Now, another thing that's caused not just drought where there's no water falling, but also that high pressure, same high pressure that could cause a drought, could cause a heat wave, where you have more than one or more than a normal heat range, or the upper range of normal in an area over an extended time. So you have not just a day of hot weather, but you could have a week of hot weather, or even more than a week of hot weather, really hot, and that would be called a heat wave. It's again caused by a high pressure, stuck high pressure system, where the upper level winds have somehow bypassed an area and is leaving it in high pressure for a long time. Now, the heat index is something that you'll see on the news when it's very hot, because if you've got lots of humidity in the air, so it's muggy and it's hot, one of the problems with that is that you don't sweat, right? Your sweat works when you have dryish air and then you perspire, and that perspiration is then just goes into the air. So when the air essentially absorbs your perspiration, it cools you off. So it's one of the ways that your body uses to keep you cool is for you to sweat. If the day is particularly muggy, you don't sweat because even if you were to perspire, that perspiration wouldn't go into the air and leave you. It would just stay on you, and that heat wouldn't leave. All right, so a heat index is how dangerous a certain amount of air is, not just because of the heat that's in it, but also the water that's in it, because the higher the water content, the less you sweat and the less you cool off, and it could lead to heat stroke or even death. Now, the very same thing that causes these droughts and causes the heat wave can cause a cold wave if, say in the winter, you've got cold air coming down from the Arctic and it's a high pressure and it's stuck. So if you have the upper atmosphere winds that have bypassed an area, you've got cold air coming down from the Arctic, and it's just high pressure, which means the wind is blowing from you, not to you, and so you're just there in the cold weather. And so a cold wave, you can have, I don't know, I always called it a cold snap. Maybe it's an old person thing. A cold snap is a cold wave, and it could last for 5 days, it could last for 2 weeks, it could last for a month. It depends. And the severity of a winter sometimes has to do with whether or not you've had cold waves for a while or not. Now, the closer you are to the Arctic, the more likely you're going to have these cold waves, because this cold air is required for it to happen. And then the last thing is the wind chill index. If the wind is blowing, that cools you off. Just like we were talking about sweating, the wind will make any heat that's in your skin leave. Okay, so that heat will actually leave the breeze. It always feels pleasant in the summer. Well, a strong wind also will cool you down very, very quickly. Well, if you're already cool and the wind is blowing, so it's a cold day, and you're losing body heat just because you're hot and the air is cold, and the wind is blowing, it's as if it were colder than it is. So a wind chill chart shows you just how dangerous that you can be in danger of frostbite specifically if not just the cold weather, the temperatures, but also the wind factors in.